The piano had been quiet for a very long time. It stood in the corner of an old building where people no longer came. The roof above it leaked when it rained, leaving dark marks on the ceiling like forgotten memories. The walls had faded to a tired gray, worn down by years of silence. Dust rested on the piano like a thin blanket, soft but heavy, as if time itself had settled there to rest. Some keys were chipped. Others were yellowed with age. A few no longer returned the way they should. When the wind passed through broken windows, it made a low sound. Almost like a sigh. Almost like the piano itself was breathing slowly, patiently, waiting for something it could not name. No one remembered who last played it. There was a time, long ago, when this room had been full of sound. Not perfect sound, but living sound. Laughter that came without warning. Fingers slipping on keys, followed by embarrassed smiles. Soft songs played late at night, when the rest of the world was quiet enough to listen. Those sounds had once lived here, but those days were gone. The building had been closed. The doors were locked and forgotten. People stopped coming, not because the piano had failed them, but because life had changed. Life became faster, louder. People chased things that felt urgent. Music like this took time, and time began to feel expensive. Slowly, the piano was left behind, not with anger, but with indifference. And indifference can be heavier than hate. One afternoon, someone walked in. This person was not special in any clear way. No camera followed them. No crowd waited outside. They had tired eyes and slow steps, like someone who had walked many roads and still didn't know where they were meant to stop. Their clothes carried dust from the day. Their shoulders held a quiet weight. They had entered the building only to escape the heat of the sun. Just a place to rest for a moment. But when they saw the piano, something inside them stopped moving. They stood there for a long moment, saying nothing. The piano looked broken, but not dead. It felt like it was holding its breath, waiting to see if this person would pass by like all the others before. Slowly, the person stepped closer. They reached out and pressed one key. The sound was not perfect. It shook a little, uneven and unsure, like a voice that hadn't spoken in years. But it was real, honest. The sound moved through the empty room, touching walls that had not heard music in a long time. For a brief moment, the building didn't feel so lonely. The person sat down, they played a few simple notes. Nothing fancy, nothing planned. No song anyone would recognize. Just sound, just feeling. The notes rose and fell, unsure but alive. The piano answered as best it could. When the person finished, they didn't smile. They didn't cry. They simply closed the piano lid gently with care, as if saying thank you to something that had given more than it. Received. That was the moment the idea was born. Not to fix the piano. Not to sell it. Not to leave it behind again, but to take it on a journey. The person didn't know exactly why. They only felt something deep inside them shift. This piano had listened long enough in silence. It had held too many unspoken memories inside for quiet walls. Maybe, just maybe, it was time for it to listen to the world again. Moving the piano was not easy. It was heavy, old, and stubborn, like it had grown roots into the floor. Every step felt like an argument with gravity. People passing by slowed down to watch. Some laughed, unsure of what they were seeing. Some shook their heads. A few asked questions, but the person gave no clear answers. When asked why they were doing this, the person only said one thing: it still has work to do. The first stop was a small place where the road was narrow and the houses stood close together, as if leaning on one another for support. The piano was placed outside, under the open sky. The air felt different there, lighter but uncertain. At first, people walked past without looking. A piano didn't belong there. It felt strange, out of place, like a dream sitting in the middle of daily life. Then a child stopped. The child didn't ask permission. Curiosity moved faster than fear. Small fingers reached out and touched the keys. The sound that came out was uneven and messy, but full of wonder. Notes bumped into each other, laughing in their own way. The child smiled. wide and proud as if discovering a secret the world had hidden. Others slowed down. They gathered without realizing it. No one clapped. No one pulled out a phone. They just listened. An older person stepped forward next. Their hands shook as they sat down. They hadn't played in years. Maybe decades. Their back was bent, their face lined with time. Their fingers rested on the keys as if remembering something long forgotten. When they pressed the keys, the sound was slow, careful. Each note felt like a memory being placed gently on the ground, one by one. The music carried weight, but also relief. When the song ended, the older person stood up quietly and walked away. They did not speak, but their eyes were wet. Their steps felt lighter. That was how it began. The piano traveled from place to place. Sometimes it sat in busy streets where noise never stopped. Cars, voices, footsteps rushing past. Other times it rested in quiet spaces where even a cough sounded loud. Wherever it went, the same thing happened. People noticed it. They slowed down. They hesitated. Then someone played. Not all music was beautiful. Some songs were broken. Notes fell apart halfway through. Some were angry, loud, and sharp, like emotions that had waited too long. Some stopped suddenly because the player couldn't continue. Hands trembled. Breathing changed, but the piano never judged. It stayed still. It listened. One evening, a person sat down who barely touched the keys at first. They stared at them for a long time like they were afraid of what might come out. When they finally played, the sound was sharp and fast. Too fast. Their hands moved like they were running from something they could not escape. When the music ended, the person leaned back and whispered, barely loud enough to hear, "I forgot how to breathe." No one answered. No one needed to dot another day. The piano stood near a place where many people waited for work that never came. Faces were tired. Hope felt thin. A person with rough hands sat down. Their fingers were stiff, shaped by years of hard effort. They played only 3 notes, again and again. Each note felt heavy, like a question with no answer. When they stopped, they stayed seated for a long time. Then they stood, nodded once, and walked away a little straighter than before. The piano didn't move quickly. The journey was slow, almost stubbornly slow. Roads were long. Weather was not always kind. Sometimes the piano was covered carefully to protect it from rain. Other times it stood in sunlight so bright it hurt the eyes. The person guiding the piano never rushed. Over time, he noticed something strange. The piano felt different, not in weight, but in presence. It was still old, still scratched, still imperfect, but it felt full, like a cup slowly filling, drop by drop. Each person left something behind. Not a name, not a story spoken out loud, but a feeling grief settled deep in the lower keys. Hope danced lightly in the higher ones. Fear hid in sudden pauses. Love lingered in soft endings. The piano carried all of it without breaking. Sometimes no one played. The piano waited. Minutes passed. Then ours. Doubt crept in. The person guiding it wondered if the journey was over. If the piano had already done what it was meant to do, then just when the silence grew heavy, someone always came. One night, under dim lights, a person sat down who smelled of rain and long roads. They played gently, almost kindly. The music felt like a hand placed softly on a shoulder. When they finished, they rested their forehead against the piano for a brief moment, like saying goodbye to someone they loved but could not keep. The piano did not respond, but it remembered as days passed. People stopped asking why the piano was there. They simply accepted it. They understood without words that this was not about skill. It was about release. About being heard without having to explain. The person guiding the piano faded into the background. They spoke less, watched more. Their role was not to lead, but to carry. Late one afternoon, as the sun lowered and shadows stretched long across the ground, the piano stood in an open space between many paths. People passed by from different directions. Some stopped. Some didn't. A person approached slowly. They didn't sit right away. They stood there staring at the keys, like they were facing a difficult truth. Their shoulders were tight, their breath shallow. Finally they sat down. One hand touched the keys, then pulled back. The other followed. At last, they played a single note. It hung in the air, thin and lonely. Then another note, then silence. The person stayed still. The world moved around them, but something felt suspended. Like the piano was waiting for something more. The person looked up, eyes filled with something unfinished, and that was where the journey paused, not because the piano was done, but because it was about to carry something heavier than ever before, to be continued. The single note still hung in the air. It was thin, almost fragile, like it could disappear if someone breathed too hard. The person at the piano stayed still, hands resting lightly on the keys, eyes fixed on a place far away. Around them, life kept moving. Footsteps passed. Voices rose and faded, but something quiet had settled in that open space. The piano waited slowly. The person's shoulders dropped. Their breath changed. It became deeper, steadier, as if the piano had given them permission to pause. Their fingers moved again, this time without fear. Another note followed the first, then another. The sounds were soft, unsure, but honest. The music did not rush. It didn't try to impress anyone. It moved the way feelings move when they finally feel safe enough to come out. People nearby stopped walking. Some turned, without knowing why. Others felt something pull at them and followed it. A small circle formed, not close, not far. No one spoke. No one interrupted. The person played. At first the music felt lonely. There were long spaces between the notes. Silence filled the gaps. But slowly something shifted. The notes began to lean toward each other. The pauses felt less heavy. The sound grew warmer, fuller. Like someone finding their way home step by step, the piano responded. Keys that once sounded tired now felt awake. Low notes carried depth. High notes felt lighter than before. It was as if every story the piano had collected was listening now. It was quietly standing behind the person who played. When the final note faded, the silence that followed was different from before. It wasn't empty. It felt full. The person lifted their hands and sat there for a moment. Their eyes were wet, but their face looked calm, lighter, as if something inside them had been set down. They stood up slowly and stepped away from the piano. No one clapped. No one needed to. One by one, others stepped forward. A person with a careful posture sat down next. Their movements were neat, controlled. They played gently, like they were afraid of making a mistake. Halfway through, their hands paused. They took a deep breath and continued, this time pressing the keys with more confidence. When they finished, they smiled softly, surprised by themselves. After them came someone who laughed nervously before playing a short, playful tune. The sound made a few people smile. It felt good to laugh without a reason. Another person played only for a minute, then stopped and shook their head. That's all I needed, they said quietly, and walked away with a lighter step. The piano listened to all of it, as the sun moved across the sky. The space around the piano felt different. Strangers stood closer now, not touching, but connected. People who would never speak to each other shared the same silence, the same feeling. The person who had guided the piano stood a little distance away. They watched with tired eyes and a full heart. They had never planned this moment. They had only followed a feeling, step by step, place by place. Now they understood. The piano was never meant to be fixed. Its chipped keys, its uneven sound, its scars from time, those were not flaws. They were invitations. People did not come to the piano to be perfect. They came to be real. As evening approached, the lights softened. The crowd thinned, but the feeling stayed. A few people remained nearby, sitting quietly, as if they didn't want to break whatever had formed. The piano stood calmly, as it always had, but it no longer felt like it was waiting. It felt complete. The person guiding it stepped closer and ran a hand along its side. The wood was worn smooth in places, rough in others. It felt familiar now, like an old friend who had seen many versions of the same pain and never turned away. That night, the piano did not move. For the first time since the journey began, it stayed in one place. The next morning, people returned. Some came with curiosity. Others came because something inside them had not let them sleep. Word had spread, not through screens or signs, but through feeling. Through quiet conversations that began with, "There's something there you should hear." A person arrived carrying nothing but a heavy look. They sat down and played slowly. Each note sounded careful, like they were walking across thin ice. Halfway through, the music stopped. Their head dropped forward, and their shoulders shook. They did not play again. They did not have to. The piano had already heard them. Someone nearby placed a hand gently on their back. No words were exchanged. None were needed. Later, a person who had never touched a piano before sat down. They pressed a key and laughed at the sound. Then another. Then another. Their laughter grew bright and free. It reminded others of something simple and forgotten throughout the day. The piano continued its quiet work. It did not solve problems. It did not change the world, but it did something smaller, somehow bigger. It reminded people that they were not alone. As days passed, the piano became part of the space. People left small things nearby. A folded note with no name. A flower placed carefully on the bench. A piece of string tied loosely around one leg. Not offerings, just signs of gratitude. The person who had carried the piano knew their part was ending. One evening, when the sky was painted with soft colors, they closed the piano lid slowly. They did not lock it. They did not cover it. They simply stepped back. They spoke for the first time in a while. "It's yours now," they said. Not to anyone in particular, and they meant it. They walked away without looking back. The piano stayed. Days turned into weeks. The piano remained where it was, open to anyone. Some days were quiet. Other days were full. People came and went. Some returned again and again. Others came only once. Each time the piano listened. It carried grief without growing heavy. It held joy without losing balance. It remembered pain without letting it take over. One afternoon, a child asked an older person, "Why is the piano here?" The older person thought for a moment and said, "Because people need somewhere to put their feelings." The child nodded, as if that made perfect sense. As time went on, the piano did not belong to one place anymore. It belonged to everyone who had ever touched it. Everyone who had ever listened. Everyone who had ever felt something they could not explain. It had traveled far, not in distance alone, but in purpose. From silence to sound. From waiting to listening. From being forgotten to becoming a home for untold stories. And even when no one was playing, the piano was never quiet again because inside its worn wood and tired, keys lived something that could not be taken away. The sound of being human. The end.